Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Asliner Ozen from the Dialogue Institute at Austin. We are here with you again with another Meet the Author panel. Previously, we had Dr. Craig Considine to talk to us about his book, The Humanity of Muhammad, A Christian View. Today, we have Dr. Jill Carroll with us. Dr. Carroll is a scholar, writer, and consultant who earned her PhD in philosophy of religion from Rice in 1994. She has published numerous books and articles in her field of specialty, as well as in world religions and religion and public life. She worked for many years as a lecturer and an adjunct associate professor at Rice University and at several campuses of the University of Houston. She has taught continuing education classes in philosophy, world religions, and humanities at the Women's Institute of Houston for almost 20 years. She served as executive director of the Banyuk Center for Religious Tolerance at Rice University from 2004 to 2009, and is the creator and founding director of the Amazing Faiths Dinner Dialogues. Today, she will be talking about her book, A Dialogue of Civilizations, Gülen's Islamic Ideals and Humanistic Discourse. Dr. Carroll, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So without further ado, I'd like to just jump right into the question.
Please, yeah.
All right. So tell us about the journey that led to you writing this book.
And it was a journey for sure, like literally and figuratively. In December of 2004, I traveled to Turkey. I was living in Houston. I was at Rice University. We had just begun the Banyuk Center, and I was invited by a group to go to Turkey. And so I was one of, I don't know, maybe 12, 15 people. And at that time, I did not realize that the people who were organizing the trip were people inspired by the ideas of Fethullah Gülen. But I soon found out that that's who they were and learned about the movement. And so we did the trip to Turkey and learned that taking these interfaith trips to Turkey was part of, at the time, part of what some groups in the movement were doing to educate people about Turkey, about Islam, about the traditions of dialogue and peaceful coexistence in Islam and in the history of Islam. So I was very interested in this and came back from the trip and began my research into Mr. Gülen's ideas and into the movement that had sprung up around his ideas, and really getting steam and starting strong in the 80s and moving forward. And just became more and more interested as a scholar, as someone who, as an academic and scholar, studies world religions and philosophy of religion and ideas in religion. And in a post 9/11 world, this was particularly interesting and meaningful to me, and seeming at the time seemed very important to focus on. So I ended up spending a great deal of time over the next 6 or 7 years with the community and learning, and in the process ended up writing this book. So it started literally with a journey, a trip to Turkey. I ended up going back to Turkey several more times, and both on these sort of interfaith trips, but also then once the book was published by a Turkish publisher, going back, to do things with the book, and in the process ended up seeing so much more of the Hizmet community. So it's been an incredible thing.
So if I remember correctly, I think a student approached you.
Yeah, I was standing. I was, okay, so two things. One, I was in my office at the Banyuk Center at Rice, and a student came by, or a couple of them, I think, and said, hi, we'd like to meet with you. Can we talk with you? And I said, of course. And And they said, we'd like to invite you to Turkey. And I was like, that's very nice of you. Who are you? And who's inviting me to Turkey? So they told me their names all over again. And one of them was, I don't know, they were studying something over on the other side of the campus in engineering or science or something. And we'd like for you to come to Turkey. And I said, thank you. Again, who is, it was just this very sort of weird thing. And so once I started asking different questions and made a few phone calls and stuff, I figured it out. And they said, and so I agreed to go. And then they said, okay, we'll get back to you. We'll follow up with the tickets. The trip will be in December on these rough dates. So I didn't hear anything, and I was standing. This was, I don't know, a week before I was to leave, and I hadn't heard. And I'm standing in line at the post office, the Rice University campus post office. I'm in line waiting, and I hear Dr. Carroll, and I turn around, and here's yet another young Turkish student, and he says, "I have your tickets." And I said, "My tickets?" He goes, "Your plane tickets for Turkey." I was like, were you just hanging out at the post office waiting to give me my tickets? I mean, it was the weirdest thing, but it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect, and it worked out beautifully.
So did they introduce you to Fethullah Gulen, or were you introduced in Turkey?
No, I met him. He was not in Turkey when I was there.
Oh, okay.
He was already living in Pennsylvania. And so when some of the folks that were in the publishing wing of the movement, when they talked to me about the idea of writing a book, and I talked to them about it and said, here's the kind of book I would write, and here's the conditions under which I would write it. I'm a secular scholar. I'm not Muslim. I'm not Turkish. I'm a secular academic scholar in the study of religion. And so I approach things in a certain way, and I wasn't sure that was something that that they would want. And so, when we were having those conversations so that we were clear, one of the conditions was I need to meet him personally. There are questions that I want to ask him directly, and it's fine. Of course, other people will be there and will need to translate sometimes between Turkish and English, although he speaks some English as well. And I was learning enough Turkish to be able to translate for myself certain passages in his writing, so that I could, not rely exclusively on other people's translations. But that was one of the conditions of writing, is that he's a living person. I need to meet with him personally. And so it was arranged. And so I and a few other colleagues went up to Pennsylvania, and I had 2 meals with him. We had a dinner meal, and then I spent the night, and then we had breakfast together the next day as well. So I had some time to sit with him and ask him some questions.
Perfect. So this book is divided into 5 themes: inherent human value and dignity, freedom, ideal humanity, education, and responsibility. And each section, Fethullah Gulen is in textual conversation with other thinkers and philosophers. When I was reading the chapters, I envisioned myself sort of witnessing the dialogue between the 2 scholars and you as the moderator. So I want to know, why did you choose to write this book that way? And was there something more that you wanted the reader to take from the dialogue?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I wrote the book the way that I did because that's sort of how the idea for it came to me. And here's how it happened. So when I did this trip in 2004, and in 2005 came to learn more about Gulen's ideas after having spent at that time almost 20 years teaching in a university setting. and teaching these very broad humanities courses. We have a sort of joking name that we call them, from Plato to NATO. You know, you start in the ancient Greek period, you go all the way through, and you end in the mid 20th century or something, you know. And so there's very broad-based humanities courses that that focus on philosophy, history, literature, art, you know, broad-based humanities. And so I've spent 20 years teaching that stuff. And from the Western perspective, mostly a Western perspective, sometimes from Asia, you know, the ideas of Buddhism or Confucianism or Shinto, or, you know, from a world religions perspective, but mostly from a Western perspective. So as I'm reading through Goulin's speeches and essays and the books and things, the light bulbs are going off, because I'm seeing connections between what Goulin is saying and what I know, for example, Immanuel Kant says about inherent human dignity and moral worth. I see connections between what Goulin says about education and how important education is for full human development and thriving, and that if we're ever going to achieve our best selves as human beings, we have to be properly educated. And so immediately I see a connection between what he's saying and what I know Plato talks about, or Socrates talks about in Plato's Republic, and what I know Confucius talks about, because I've spent my 20 years teaching those things, right? So, and so on. When he talks about freedom, when he talks about being responsible, human responsibility for the world, that we can't just take ourselves out and be these saintly, mystical people who just shut themselves off away from the world and don't have any impact. We are responsible for the world, and we're here, and the world will be what we create it to be. Jean-Paul Sartre, from a completely different perspective, from an atheist existential perspective, argues a similar thing, that we are responsible for the world. We don't control it. It was here before we were, and it'll be here after we die, but we're still responsible. So it just seemed that there were important connections in the worldview of Mr. Goulin that resonated really powerfully with things that were important themes in other parts of world thought. And first of all, I was thrilled to see those connections. I was very interested by them. And thirdly, I thought that there would be so many people who would be surprised at those connections, because they don't think an Islamic scholar, they don't think Islam in general has strong things to say about those topics. And so I thought this is something that needs to be explored, and I find it interesting. And if I were to write a book about Goulin, it would be on these themes. So that's kind of how it happened, you know?
Yeah. I believe it was in the first chapter, Gulen says that there is a place for Islam in democracy, something along these lines. And in the recent years, I think I've been thinking about that more often. And after reading your book, I was able to find how Islam or any sort of belief could be incorporated into democracy, which is
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah. And now, of course, the question is there room for democracy in the world? I mean, democracy itself is under threat in so many places, including in the United States. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the questions and the inquiry has shifted since I wrote the book, and it was published in 2007.
Yeah. So you were able to pick up on the similarities when you were researching. What surprised you the most?
I think what surprised me in general when I began to delve into his work is how what's the word? How broad-minded it is. Well, we know from his biography that he is largely self-educated, and he's a he's a person of formidable intelligence and formidable knowledge, and it's delightful to read his work and to see the depth of it. And the other thing is to see how he moves seemingly seamlessly from sort of theoretical or academic or philosophical or theological concepts into real world application and real world living, from theoretical ideas to actually how to live this in your life and how to actualize these ideas in the world and in the community. And that's not easy to do. It's not easy to do at all. And it's one of the pitfalls in philosophy as a discipline, because philosophy sometimes rightly has a reputation for being all theory and no practice. But that was a delightful surprise to see in Goulin's work, both high dollar theorizing, some really significant thought happening here, and then also significant application of those ideas.
That's a wonderful point. I remember when I was, you know, eighth grade, early high school, my parents would give me, short books written by Gulen. And I used to find it really hard to understand. Like you
Mm,
said, it was, really high academic writing.
mhm.
And I often couldn't understand how I could apply any of this to
Yeah,
life.
yeah.
Um, and it reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend, and she was talking about how in religion, sometimes she's a Christian, and she would say that some of the things that are written in the Bible, she doesn't see how they're applicable now.
Mhm,
And so I think it's great that not just Gulen, but other scholars can show us how to apply these.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, if it doesn't help make our lives better in some way, then what's
Yeah.
the usefulness of it is limited.
Mhm. How so you are, you're very knowledgeable in the humanities. Do you think that writing this book changed you or changed your views on anything?
Um, it confirmed some of my views about connection, that if we're willing to sit with it long enough and to sit with people long enough, we can find some kind of connection,
Mhm.
even among people who seem to be so different. I remember during the writing of it, um, it was submitted to peer review and other scholars looked at it and stuff and had questions, and I had revisions and all that. So we'd go through the traditional process. And there were some serious questions about the chapter on Jean-Paul Sartre, because he's probably the one that is most diametrically opposed in worldview to Gulen. And there were some questions, can you really find enough resonance between these two? I mean, it seems like a hard, it's a gap. It's a big gap. And I said, I think I can see it. I think I can make the case for it. And eventually I made the case enough to satisfy the peer review board, um, and it just sort of confirmed for me that even in situations where people are coming from vastly different perspectives, if we're willing to sit with it long enough and just stay with it, we can find a connection. Um, that was my belief at that time. That belief oriented my work in interfaith relations. It oriented our work at the Boniac Center for Religious Tolerance, which I was directing at the time. And so writing this confirmed that for me in this limited space of a textual dialogue. And it's not to push aside the gaps or the differences. There are profound differences. But it goes to this larger question of, how are we to live in this world together in the midst of radical difference? We are never, ever going to all think the same. We're never going to worship the same God. Some of us are not going to worship a God at all. This is just the way that it is. We are destined to share this planet together, and we are different. We are radically different from each other sometimes. So in the midst of that radical difference, how and where do we find connection? And to me, that's an ongoing question. I may today not, I don't know, today I don't feel quite as optimistic as I felt about it 10 years ago, but I still hold to it. I still push myself to believe in that possibility. And I think this book deepened that hope for me and that belief for me.
I just want to say I'm so glad that the chapter with Sartre is on there, because that was one of my favorite chapters.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, while I was reading it, I thought, how is this going to work? There's so many differences. But in the other chapters as well, you not only do you highlight the similarities, but you do mention where they might disagree with each other.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think it's a great thing to ponder on, because I don't think dialogue is just about, coming together because we have similarities. I think it's also coming together because we have differences and we need to discuss those and
Yes.
understand each other.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And it's harder to do that. And it takes a different type of investment to do that. It demands more of us as participants in relationship and in dialogue to do that. It pushes us to go deeper and to expand ourselves. It's harder work. It takes more.
Yeah. And in order to do that, we need to learn and be willing to learn about each other and our beliefs.
Yeah. It's like a muscle. We have to exercise and build up our capacity for difference. Because when we're with people who are very different from us, perhaps on fundamental things, it's not comfortable immediately. It's uncomfortable. And we often naturally move away from things that are uncomfortable. But in order for this to work, we have to build up a tolerance for discomfort and be willing to sit with people and have relationships with people who don't think the way we do, who don't believe the way we do, and tolerate that discomfort enough to create some kind of connection. And it takes practice. It's like building up your muscles. If you're at the gym, it's uncomfortable at first until you build up the strength to be able to do it.
And yeah, that relates so much to, I think, socially what's going on in the United States right now.
It's very
So
hard.
my next question is, this book was published in 2007. And if you were to write this book or a similar one about dialogue, how different would it be now?
I think I would write much of the same thing in terms of, if the thesis statement, the sort of scope of the book, putting Goulin's ideas into conversation. I think now I would add a reflection on the limits of dialogue. What are the limits? In what situations is dialogue limited? In what situations is dialogue not really possible, at least as a first recourse, maybe as a second or third? In what situations are we not expected to immediately consent to dialogue? If someone is threatening your life, if someone doesn't respect you as a human being
Mm.
or as an equal human being deserving of respect to them, equal to them, are we required to dialogue in that moment? I'm not sure. I think it's worth talking about the limits of dialogue. It's easy to get sentimental about dialogue. Dialogue will solve everything if we could all just dialogue. But I don't think that dialogue is always possible in every situation. So I would probably want to add some more reflection about that. And I would want to go up and ask Mr. Gulen what he thinks about it. I want to hear from him, and look around and see what other scholars and thinkers and practitioners of this have to say about it. Mm-hmm. Particularly in situations where, there've been genocides, mm-hmm. where people have just killed each other. What created the possibilities for dialogue in the wake of those types of incidents? What had to happen first in order for there to be even the possibility of dialogue? That's probably where I would spend more time.
That's interesting. So I came to the US when I was 7. And my parents have been involved with, sort of, I guess, the Gulen movement. And growing up, one of the things that they sort of instilled in me was just to be the best person that I can be. Mm-hmm. Be a role model, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And I think their thinking was, like you said, sometimes you can't have a dialogue straight, out of meeting someone and just go straight into, all these deep conversations. People have to get to know you.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that's really important. And maybe we shouldn't expect everyone to partake in dialogue. Maybe some people just should be living as role models, living their life, and others are maybe more equipped to partake in such things.
Yeah. That could be very well the case. It reminds me of something, I don't remember who said this in Christianity. It was some historical figure. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but on the issue of evangelism, evangelizing and witnessing for the faith. And his response was, I witness for the faith every day. Every time that I'm awake, I'm witnessing for the faith. Sometimes I do it with words. The idea was that his life was the witness, being the best, who he was, being the person that he is, and living the way he lives is the most powerful witness, more than anything he would ever say. And so I think that's consistent with something that what you were saying your parents taught you, is that the best thing you can do is to be the best person you can be. And I think Mr. Gulen would totally agree with that.
Yeah. Especially now, I feel like maybe going straight into dialogue could cause, issues.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think some kind of relationship has to be there first, and then there's curiosity, So now that we're friends, my sense is that we think differently about this one thing. Will you tell me more about how you think? That begins the conversation.
And it's so much easier when, like a friend has a question that I can specifically answer. So it just makes it easier just to get to know more people and answer their questions as they have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So those are the questions that I had regarding your book. Now I kind of want to delve into your personal life a little bit.
Sure.
So you're in Arizona. What are you up to? What are you working on?
We came out here for my spouse's job. So I got nothing out here. I don't do anything out here. We have an 8-year-old, And so I do a lot of stuff with our child, and pack lunches and do a lot of I'm doing the work from home parent thing. And I do a little bit of online teaching still. There's an entity in Houston called the Women's Institute of Houston, and I've taught there for almost 30 years. And so I do I do classes for them still. I do the occasional speaking engagement still. I have a Patreon where I do some writing weekly, and I have patrons who have signed up for that. So I do that. But I'm not doing as much of the kind of work that I did before. I've kind of moved away from that. We were talking before the program started about how life has different seasons in it, and for me, and when I wrote this book, I was in a season of my life where I was spending all my time, all my career was writing and speaking and traveling and being very heavily involved in the interfaith relations work, and I was all over the place. And then I had to come off the road because I got sick. I got cancer, so I had to spend a whole year getting treatment. And then once I got the all clear in terms of my health, I decided I really didn't want to go back to that type of work schedule anymore. And plus, we were ready to become parents. And so we adopted our child in 2012. Our child was born. And then about that same time, I started taking care of my elderly parents. So seasons of life changed, and I, wasn't doing this type of work as much anymore. I was still doing some of it, but not nearly as much as I had been. And so since we've come out here, I'm still doing a little bit of it, but I guess I would say I'm not officially retired. I'm too young to be retired, I guess, but I'm sort of semi-retired, and the kind of work I'm doing has nothing to do with any of this. I'm dabbling in other things and stuff that's completely unrelated to any of this.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with taking a break.
Yeah, and so I've always been someone who's had a lot of different interests. And it's also why I never really wanted to be a full-blown tenured professor. I never tried to be a tenured professor. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep one leg in academia and then one leg in entrepreneurial stuff and in other kinds of stuff that has nothing to do with my field. And so that's just kind of how I've run my life.
I think I read in your website that you were certified as a master
naturalist. Yeah, when I was in Texas, I was a certified master naturalist, and I'm about to start that training for Arizona. Arizona started a master naturalist program, and they modeled it on the Texas one. So I'm about to start that training in January, and this is where you learn all about the ecosystems and the wildlife and the flora and the fauna and all of the stuff in a given area. And then you become certified, and then you volunteer for the state at various parks, state parks, county parks, wildlife rescue places, school, all kinds of places. And the state uses you as a volunteer to help educate the public about all this stuff. And so, yeah, so I'm excited. This is a totally different ecosystem out here. Totally different animals than we had in Texas, where Texas is diverse too, but this is not the Gulf Coast. This is the desert. It's totally different.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah, I love it.
I also have a lot of interests, and I find it hard to just stick to one thing.
Yeah. And, you don't have to. I mean, you can, you got to pick something, to do your career on. But once you get that going, you can do other stuff too. That's my view, at least. I mean, that's what I've done.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that I'm seeing people like that.
Yeah, because there's so much you can do. I mean, there's just so many things, and it's I just find it more interesting that way, to live that way.
Well, that's all I have
Okay,
for for
thank you.
thank you so much for being with us today.
You're
Thank
welcome, and good luck finishing up school. And
you.
to the Dialogue Institute there in Austin, in the years that I was doing this work, I I spent a lot of time with the Gulen community in 11 countries. I visited dozens and dozens of schools and civil society institutions. I had hundreds of meals in people's homes from the community. And it has been one of the most remarkable experiences of my life. And particularly as someone who does not practice a religion, I'm a completely secular person. And the Hizmet community consistently has treated me with sisterly love and affection. And it remains one of the most striking experiences I've had in my life. And so I'm really glad that the community is still going strong and doing its work in the world, which every day that work seems to be more and more important. So it's an honor to even be affiliated in any way with this community. So I'm really glad to come back and be talking about this stuff again after taking a little bit of a break.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It was really nice meeting you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you
So
too.
glad that you had in the beginning, it was such a weird encounter, but
Mhm.
you were sort of dragged into hopefully a positive
Oh, it
experience.
was nothing but positive. And it was a funny encounter. It was weird, but it was funny too. And my friends were like, "Where are you going?" I'm like, "I'm going to Turkey." "Where are you staying?" "I don't know." "You don't know where you're staying?" "No." "Do you have phone numbers and contacts there?" "No." But I don't know. I had a gut feeling. Do this. You're going to be fine. These are good people. You should do this. Thank God I did.
Yeah, it's so hard to believe. But
Crazy.
yeah,
Thanks for having me.
thank you so much.
Okay.
And oh yeah, stay safe.
You
Um,
too.
yeah,
Wash your hands. Wear a mask.
yep.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.